I haven't been exactly overwhelmed by many of Mark Gatiss's Doctor Who scripts. His debut to the TV series, The Unquiet Dead, which I normally refer to as simply the Dickens one, was very good, but since then I'd say they've all been average. But none of them are terrible. He is committed to telling a Doctor Who story and neither relies on gimmicks and gadgets nor tries to suck emotion out of you for the sake of effect. Moffat chances his arm and is hit or miss. Gatiss is a steady and reliable purveyor of an okay 45 minutes of television. The Cold War sees the return of the Ice Warriors, creatures not featured in the series since 1974. While I do like Ice Warriors as characters, I am not a big fan of the 4 serials they appeared in back in the classic show, especially not the Peladon stories in the 70s. In fact, I would say the last time we saw the Ice Warriors, Monster of Peladon, some fans may kill me, but I found it so abysmal I could barely sit through one viewing of all of what felt like about 100 pointless hours. But I'm not here to review that, thankfully. The Cold War takes place on board a Russian sub during, well, the Cold War. An unusual kind of setting for the new series, and to me gives the show a Tom Baker era feel, unsurprising as Gatiss is very traditional in his approach to Who, in contrast with Moffat. Unfortunately, the precedent for this, subaquatic, set in the Cold War, return of a classic monster, is Warriors of the Deep, a Silurian and Sea Devil revival which every Whovian from here to Skaro knows sucked massive Yeti balls. Another concern I have is that these days it seems like no sooner has a classic series monster been brought back, they are cuddlified, a comedy sidekicks on Taran nurse here, a lesbian Silurian detective there. So however fearsome the Ice Warriors are this week, give it a year and they'll be popping on board the TARDIS every once in a while for tea and scones. But anyway, I actually ended up rather enjoying this episode, despite Gatiss clearly beginning his writing process with no more than a pun. Ice Warrior? Cold War? Get it? There isn't a huge amount to it. Russian submarine at the North Pole in 1983, Ice Warrior thawed out of the ice after 5,000 years. When his first human encounter is unprovoked aggression, you kind of identify with him as he is lost far from his own people, rather like the Dalek in Rob Shearman's episode Dalek. He's chained up, but it turns out an Ice Warrior can escape his armour. One could literally say he didn't talk much at first, but later he really came out of his shell. Gatiss was able to resist that pun. I was not. One thing that did annoy me was the time is in a state of flux, time can be rewritten bit. So how and when the Cold War ends isn't one of those fixed points then. From the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, through Van Gogh's suicide, to Rose's dad being killed by a speeding car, there are things from the past that cannot be changed. But the Cold War could end in mutually assured destruction because of a nuclear sub in 1983. No reason for how and when the Soviet bloc falls to be a fixed point. Of course, this all comes down to whether the Doctor has to sacrifice himself and everyone in the submarine in order to save the entire human race. I thought this was well paced and had the right feel. It was somehow grown up in a way the previous 2 episodes weren't. At the same time, the kid in me loved seeing an Ice Warrior out of his armour, especially effective when it was darting around and lurking in the dark in what was a kind of Alien-style spam-in-a-can horror. Also, the supporting cast includes David Warner, and unlike other recent guest stars, he's actually used rather well, and I just wish we'd had a chance to see more of the Professor, a charming old man who works on a Soviet sub but is obsessed with the Western pop music of the era, singing along to Hungry Like the Wolf on his Walkman without a care in the world. Certainly I feel better about the show for seeing this episode and hope to see more Ice Warrior later, which we inevitably will.